So, welcome to today's webinar, which is how to create a strategic plan that really works for your association. Now, in this session today, we're going to be talking about how you can develop a plan that's really going to work and keep you focused on what you want to do moving forward. Because associations have got the ability to make a massively powerful impact on the industries, professions, and other causes that they represent. But of course, the best way to do that is to know where you're going and having a really specific strategy to get there that not only is understood and shared by your leadership team, but can be effectively communicated to your staff and other stakeholders who are going to need to be part of that to make it effective and successful. Now, what I'm going to do now is share the process that I use and I've found to be extremely useful. It's something you can easily do yourself. I've deliberately made the slides detailed because strategic planning is a process. It usually involves a lot of people, and I know you might want to share these. So as a result, when I send the email out on Monday, I won't just send out the recording. I'll also send out a PDF copy of the slides that you can use when you're talking to other people about your strategic planning process. And of course, if you've ever got any questions, just let me know. Now, when we go through the process of strategic planning, the first thing is to gain context. One of the things that I find in the many years I've worked with associations boards is that the boards are really, really aware of their profession, their industry, their cause. They know it inside out. But a common misperception that people have when they sit on an association board that they're still in their sector, but they're not. When you sit on an association board and when you're planning for an association, you're actually in the association sector. And there's a whole heap of issues that are very specific to that. Not the least of which it's a counter-cyclical kind of environment where in, say, for example, an economic downturn, associations tend to fare better if they're operating effectively. So one of the things before you even enter into this process is to ensure that all of the people who are participating actually have not just the understanding of their own sector, but an understanding of what's happening in associations, what's best practice look like, and what do you need to be aware of to ensure that you're using evidence-based decision-making processes. Lots of people can have good ideas, and one of the things that I commonly come across is people who've got fantastic ideas, but they don't have a framework that contextualizes those so that they're moving forward in a coordinated fashion, and they're wondering why things aren't working. So I'm not going to go into what are the different factors affecting associations at the moment. I mean, there's some broad things there about, obviously, in the last 20 years, we've seen massive changes in technology and digital, the ways we communicate, the different generations, what's happening in society. You can go back, and I've put the additional resource here, and look at the Association Apocalypse paper or some of the related webinars that will talk you through that. But suffice to say, associations, even prior to COVID, had been in a period of intense change where innovation was required for them to adapt to a rapidly changing landscape. Board members, decision makers, those involved in your strategic planning processes need to understand what they are so they're not operating on paradigms which have shifted and are dying out, because traditionally a lot of older people are involved in this, and I hardly put myself into that category, but we grew up in a time where association models were of a specific type. We call them service provider models. Those models are shifting. We're moving into what I call platform models now. Once again, there's other resources that you can look at that I've provided on that website where you can learn more about those. But you need to understand these to do your strategic planning effectively. And naturally, any of these discussions and also need to consider the impact of COVID-19. Now, I recently released some research where you can go through and you can read about what is the impact on associations, but when you distill that down, what are the main takeaways that people took from it that they want to input into strategic planning in the future? That you need to have a visionary leadership who's skilled and able to undertake their role. You need an effective team. You need to be operating in a financially sustainable manner with diversified revenue streams. You need to maximize your positive impact, and this is going to be relevant for the next step we're going to talk about. You need to be prepared, and you need to act now. When we distill the learnings from the 426 associations who participated in the research, and we look at what we need to know moving forward, this slide summarizes that. But I would recommend, if you're doing strategic planning, to go and get a copy of that survey, make sure that the delegates have read it and understood it so that they can internalize that when we move on to the actual process itself. And let's go there. So when associations don't exist to generate members, we don't exist to run events. We exist to make a positive impact on our sector. Now, this comes back to our purpose. What is the big thing that we were started to achieve? Because associations weren't started by a group of people who said, oh, everything's going okay for us, let's start an association. It was started because there was some need to bring together a collective of people within a profession, within an industry, or within a cause. So the best place to start your strategic planning process is by going right back to that and say, what is your vision? Now, when I use these words, I'm not thinking of those crap, dull, committee developed things that actually aren't what they say they are. Let's redefine these things. The vision is if you were successful, if your organization achieved everything that it set out to achieve, what does that look like? If you're everyone in the room where you're doing strategic planning was suddenly transported 10 years into the future and everything had gone as well as it could possibly have gone and beyond, what does that physically look like? And a vision statement is to talk about that. It's not about you saying, well, we're going to have more members than everybody else. No one else is interested. That's not going to get people passionate about engaging with your organization. With your vision, this is your chance to get people excited about the positive change that you're going to make in society, the vision you're working towards. And it's not something that you by yourself need to be able to do, but it's the thing that you're contributing towards. So if you look at here, when a great vision statement, it's about that positive outcome. I've got the example here, a world without Alzheimer's disease. Yes, the Alzheimer's Association isn't going to do that by itself, but that's part of the broad vision that they're contributing to. So that's something that their stakeholders can get excited about. It was like back when Rotary said, we're going to eradicate polio. What an amazing thing to be able to use to inspire others. Now, your purpose, when you start drilling down, your purpose is about why you exist. What is your role in achieving that vision? And your mission is about, well, what are you going to do and for who to be able to achieve that vision? And a lot of people put them together. And I personally prefer that because the average punter really doesn't understand the difference between a vision, purpose, and mission. But your people undertaking your strategic planning process really need to, because what you've done when you create this well is created a lens through which anybody who's implementing can look at any planned activities and understand what they can and can't do. So, and keep it succinct. There's nothing worse when we're one of those really long mission and purpose statements, which people fall asleep halfway through. Nobody wants to read that. What you want to do here is to be very clear and be broad about what it is you do. And I love the one for the British Medical Association, their purpose. We look after doctors so they can look after you. Or with the Australian Food and Grocery Council, even made it more succinct. We're about sustaining Australia, and I love that because it's got broad applicability. It's in the mission statement where you get around to the what is it that we do. Well, we're the and AFGC once again has said we're the voice of the Australian food and grocery industry and a valued service provider to members. That's really clearly set the parameters around what their actions are that they need to undertake to achieve their mission. Now, when we go through this, you create this lens. Now, when we're looking at the mission, some of the things that you might want to address in there is looking about what is it that your association actually does. Now, if we're to break it down, associations really, they can only take part in sort of these 5 areas. Now, not everybody does all of these 5, but these are the 5 things that associations traditionally do in order to achieve their vision. So they might proactively exert influence on behalf of their members. So that's about we lobby, we advocate, we somehow exert influence to others to effect a positive change, which might be a more favourable legislative landscape, for example. They provide support directly to members. And these are things like your products, services, publications, communications, events. It's the stuff you do that you directly deliver to members. You might be about building community and facilitating connections between members, which is one of the really underrated, powerful competitive advantage that associations have, because products and services anyone can compete with, but a strong and engaged community is something that is exceptionally hard to compete against. And Angela, I see that word mission. I've got to admit, I much prefer the word purpose, but that's certainly something which people can take on there. Now, building the skills of members through education And also lastly, advancing a shared cause that's advocated by the collective. And that's a lot of things we see in charitable associations. But you don't need to do all of these things. You may say that your goal as an organization is to be the voice of your industry. And as the voice of the industry, the only thing you may choose to do is proactively exert influence on behalf of members. Now, any activities that you do may be geared around that, and all your funding models will be geared around that. But that's a strategic decision that you need to make at this point of the strategic planning process when you're getting through your vision, your purpose, your mission, and understanding, because you're setting those parameters in place. Now, once you've got that, that's your longer term stuff, saying where we're going, why we're doing it, what exactly we're going to do. And once you're, and generally it's a board who's doing strategic planning, or your leadership group come together and have established those, then we can start looking at what we're doing over the course of the strategic plan. Now, typically at this stage, we move into things which we call our goals, objectives, and strategies. Now, I'm going to just give you a quick glimpse at the structure here, just so you can show you where we're at. So at the top, you can see we've said, well, what's the time frame? At the moment, one of the things that we've noted through the research is time frames are shrinking for strategic plans. Things like your vision, your mission, and purpose don't tend to change too much, but the strategic plans are tending to go for 1 to 2 years right now, because we're in the middle of COVID. We're about to fall off an economic cliff in September. And I just chatted with a couple of my friends in Washington this morning, and they were saying that they're very, very concerned that a recession might be a mild way to put what's coming. And with these things happening in such a changing environment, you really want to keep your planning processes short and nimble and very responsive. So when you see here, you've got your time frame, your vision, your mission or purpose, your values, and now we're getting into your goals, your objectives, and then your strategies between them. So just to give you the framework there. So we're going to come back to those goals and strategies. So with the objectives, one of the big pitfalls that I see associations fall into is making their objectives about them. We're going to review our governance. We're going to get this many members. It's all about the association. Now, a really powerful strategic plan should be something you want to share with people to show them how purpose orientated you are and how you're about making a tangible difference to members. And so one of the things that you'll see in the slides here, and so I put examples in red there, are of objectives. The kind of objectives that you might put into a plan. You wouldn't put all of these in. Most people will have 3 to 4. And I find if you've got anything more than these 3 to 4 objectives, that's the 3 to 4 big things that you've got to achieve over the duration of the plan to advance towards your vision. You won't get them done. If you put 1 down, you'll get 1 done. If you put 3 down, you'll probably get 3 done. You put 5, you'll probably get 4 done. You put 7, you'll get 1 done. You want to be able to focus the resources that you have. So these are quite simple examples that I put here, but the kind of objectives that you might have is an objective might be, well, we're going to work with the government to ensure our members are better positioned to navigate the post-COVID economic environment. So that's an objective. The strategies that sit in there need to be specific. So we're going to have planned government infrastructure projects advanced so that they're coming on early to provide more work for our members, which is basically, you're not saying we will lobby the government for. That's wishy-washy. There is no try, there is only do, to quote a wise man. What you want to do is you want to say, this is what we're going to do. We will have mandated PPE requirements for our profession, or government mandated. Really specify in these, what is the outcome you are working for, and make them things that are really going to make a huge impact for your members. Things that when your members look at those strategies and projects, they're going to go, holy crap, because most people are only members of you for 2 to 3 reasons. Give them these in your strategy so that you can prove to members that you're working for them. So this is about your exerting influence. Another objective might be, we will ensure members can access the services they need when they need them to better build their career or business. Because right now we're really having to focus in this time of crisis that we are. So then talk about exactly underneath the objective when you get to the strategies and projects. Well, what do you need to do? What are the 3 to 4 things that you must do to achieve that? Once again, and you'll get a copy of these slides. I'm not just going to read them out to you. So think about talking about how you're going to facilitate strong member communities. How are you going to help build the skills of your members? You're not going to do all these objectives, but which ones will you choose, or what ones are you going to put in there that are about what you're going to do. Traditionally speaking, we have normally, your 3 to 4 objectives. Say if you've got 4, 3 of them will be about what are you going to do to make a tangible impact on your sector. But don't forget that critical last one. There needs to be at least one, or there needs to be one objective that talks about the enablers, the operational enablers that must be in place for you to be able to do everything else successfully. Now, one of the biggest problems is these are the things that no one else gives a crap about, that all your members, all your stakeholders just assume that you're doing all of these things well. Everyone assumes you've got best practice governance. Everyone assumes that you've got skilled staff and that you've got excellent segmented communications where you have a deep understanding of all of the different markets that you represent. They all assume that you've got excellent reporting structures that ensure evidence-led decision-making, that your processes and technology are spot on, and that you've got great business development, but none of us have everything perfect. And in the strategic plan, it's important to prioritize these things that are fundamental. And a top tip, the number one omission that I see from a lot of associations looking forward is the business development aspect. When I go into organizations who are having trouble raising revenue, often it's because there's no one there whose job it is to make sure that that money is coming through steadily. And in many different areas, there's lots of different layers of business development that associations should have. There's about 7, and most people are lucky to have 1 or 2. These are the things which you need to make sure are prioritized, and having that one objective where underneath you've identified not everything that should be done, but the things that you're going to prioritize over the course of the plan. Because even the largest, most powerful, most wealthy associations out there aren't doing everything right. When you're going through the strategic planning process, what you're trying to do is to identify what are the things we need to be doing over the next year or 2 to ensure that we can advance our vision in a sustainable way. The other thing that this lets you do is, I've talked earlier about those wonderful ideas that people have. When people have these ideas, you can then go back to the strategic plan and use it as a lens for evaluating them. That's a great idea. Let's have a look at the plan. It fits into the plan, great, let's do it. It doesn't fit into the plan, look, let's put it on the whiteboard for the next strategic planning session so that we can collect that idea, but we're not going to distract. Because one of the other pitfalls that we see is people come up with wonderful strategic plans, but then they get distracted because a board member will have a pet project that they want to advance, or someone will have had a great idea, and the effort and time that you need to be putting into advancing the strategy gets diluted by looking off to the side here on this tangent. And it's really important to retain that focus as much as possible. You can go through, and the good thing about this is when you follow this model, you should have your written strategic plan. You can do it in about 5 or 6 hours. You can have the whole thing done. And there's different ways of presenting it. But this kind of structure that I showed you before, I find to be very useful because you can do these strategies on a page. Generally, I'll split the objectives out so they sit across the page. But it gets to be a tool then that you can show people to demonstrate very clearly why you exist and where you're going. It gives you a roadmap forward that can be shared and internalized throughout the organization. But one of the things that we haven't talked about yet is probably one of the most important. For every single thing that you put in your plan, it must be measurable. You need to know, how will you know when you have done it? You need to sit down there and for everything that's gone in there to say, and sometimes it might be, if it's a review, it's been completed. But also ask the question against each inclusion, how will I know if the outcome is good, bad, or otherwise? How are we measuring success? How do we know whether we break open a bottle of champagne to celebrate or commiserate? There's always reason for having champagne. But this is why when you go through at each of these points, at each objective of each strategy, and if you put a goal in, it must be realistic and it must be time dependent and it must be measurable. One of the things that I didn't put in, sorry, I'll just go back here with the goal. You can put a goal in here and it can be really useful if there's a need to focus on something very strongly. So oftentimes when I'll put a goal into a strategic plan is if they're going through a merger into a single entity. if there's an economic crisis, if there's a financial crisis that the association is in and they're about to close their doors and we need to focus on achieving a quick turnaround, financial sustainability, you can put in goals in that instance to really help focus people. But not everyone puts in a goal, because sometimes that's actually taken through your mission, and it is really up to you, and it's really specific on a plan to plan. But a typical goal of, we want to reach 20,000 members, that's not a goal that's going to inspire anyone outside the organization. Measuring your success by how many members that you have, it's kind of like a builder measuring how wonderful the building they just built is by the number of bricks in it. It's really not something that's going to drive people. When you look at this strategy, something like those membership numbers are targets that probably belong more within the strategies and the objectives of your plan. But let's talk here about the targets, because this idea of a membership target, I'm just going to use this to illustrate, because it's one that comes up so often, like we're going to have 3,000 members by 2023. And the number of times I've had arguments with, let's not call them arguments, yes, intense conversations with board members who think it's okay to put in an unrealistic target. But when you go through and test that to validate whether that is realistic or not, it really starts to get quite interesting. And I'll give you, this is an actual, this example here. Say, for example, your best ever retention rate was 90%, and the best number of your new members that you'd ever attained was 250, and that you had 2,100 members as at December 31st, 2020. Say that for 3 years straight, you attained your best ever retention rate of 90, and for 3 years straight, you attained your best ever number of new members at 250. Well, when you sit there and you work that out, by that target, you've only got 2,208 members, 2,208 members. You are so nowhere near the 3,000 member target. So I'm not saying don't set bold targets when you go through and do your strategy. Stretch targets are awesome. But if you want to achieve something that's not possible within the confines of what you've done before, then you've got to say, well, we can't do what we did before. You can't achieve transformational targets without transformational change to support that. And a good strategic plan can provide that mandate for saying, this is the change that we need to provide. So put in the goals and give people, if you're going to put in stretch goals, make sure it's clear that something's going to change to be able to achieve it. Now, a strategic plan is just that. It's a plan. Generally, you're going to end up with something that's a plan on a page that you can use as a tool for engaging people. The next step is to do the implementation from that. Now, I'm not going to go through all of that in the 5 minutes we've got left and do some questions, but what I do want to do is just go through and say, something that I find really helpful when I'm doing implementation plans to support my strategic plan is to structure it with the objective, and for each strategy, list all of the tasks that I need to do. What are the KPIs that sit there? Who's the responsible person? And what's the status, so that I can very easily view it now. And in fact, I know Lindsay, who's on here, uses it. There's a number of really great apps and programs out there that enable you to manage all of the tasks that everybody's got and to be able to assign those tasks to people. And I would really encourage you to do it, because one of the things that we've noticed is that if you want to get people behind the plan and really working as a team to implement it, it helps if you follow the research that came out of the University of Technology in Sydney many years ago, but it's always resonated with me. The things that motivate people is having a purpose and having a plan to achieve that purpose. But then the biggest motivator is progress against the plan, seeing that you're moving forward to achieve this really compelling purpose. So your implementation, Debbie, you want a list of those apps, the Platter tools? And Lindsay, if you're still on, can you note the one there? But I'm also happy to send it as part of and I'll make a note here. I'll send the list of apps. Oh, thank you, Lindsay. Asana, awesome. I couldn't remember that name. Yeah, so when you want to motivate people to get engaged with your plan, go through and make sure your comms supports that. Another pitfall that I see with associations who are moving along a strategy is it's this tick box. They'll go through and go, right, done it, next, done it, next, done it, next. Take time to celebrate the wins with your team And also, if there's things that haven't gone as well, do the analysis to understand why, so you can take those learnings forward and treat it as a learning experience. Because in the current environment we're in, we are in a situation where fail fast works. You don't have the luxury of having a year or two to sit there and figure out if this one idea is going to be valid. We need to go out there and set up a structure where you can try stuff. And if you fail, that's great, because tick, there's one thing that we know is not going to work, we'll move to the next. And your team need to be moved into that culture. So a lot of the implementation around this plan has got to be around, how do you manage the culture of your team so that they're both passionate about what you want to achieve, but also feel that they've got the leeway and to be able to implement in a way that's going to move you forward as quickly as possible. Now, I've left 2 minutes here. If anyone has any questions, do you want to note them into the chat there? Now, for anyone who wants to copy the slides, I'll do a list of those apps, and the PDF, sorry, the recording will come out on Monday. If you want any more information, if you go to either sms.online.net.au or answers.net.au, there's a lot of the resources that I talked about, including the videos. But from here, great strategic planning doesn't need to take months and months to do. If you get people in, and Zoom is fantastic because you can have everyone's intention, you've just got to go through a process like this, and whoever's sitting there can type up, you can have your strategic plan done by the end of the day, and you can follow that framework. And if anyone wants me to email you that template, do let me know, because that tool is not just helpful for growing your organization, it lets your sponsors, it lets other stakeholders, it lets government see really clearly what it is you're about and where you're going. So thank you very much for your time. And yeah, I'm happy to stay online if you've got any questions. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Alrighty, I'm just going to make notes from what people have wanted there. If people have provided their emails, that's the addresses when they registered, that's where everything's going to go to. But the productivity apps, the template for planning. Yeah, if anyone's got any questions on this, I do these a couple of times a week, so happy to pass on anything I can. Asana. Is there a template? Actually, the implementation strategy. Do you know what? I've got heaps of different ones that I use, but generally I'm just trying to think. I don't know if there's any that I can pass out because they're very, very specific. I can see if I can find the implementation, something there. But a lot of people use Excel, but I'd really recommend using the productivity apps, which enable you to assign the tasks, because it's so much easier to get everyone engaged. Oh, the member research surveys. Absolutely. Having the data, so when we talk about that context at the beginning, using the data and the evidence is critical. So one of the things that we really recommend is having within your software ongoing analysis that's really producing insights on a day-to-day basis, rather than these snapshots that you might do once every couple of years. So yes, absolutely, you need to get member satisfaction, but you want to actually not just look at what members say, but look at what they do. So if a member might say to you, this is a great idea for a product, but they may not actually use it. So actually look at the data about what members are buying, what market segments, what penetration into market segments do you have, and by market segment, what is their satisfaction? Look at things like your NPS score, your net promoter scores, because you will find, I guarantee, in different market segments, there'll be vastly different opinions of your organization. And when you go through the strategic planning process, that really helps to inform. And when you look in the slides in more detail, you'll see one of the objectives when it talked about providing the right services to members was identifying in each market segment what are those compelling ones, so that you're providing the resources that people need, not just the resources that you think that they need. So yes. And Julie, I think Lindsay uses Asana, and that's the one that I've had really good feedback on, but there's quite a few. How do you get around people not being members in these different financial reasons? Do you know, Catherine, that's a really good point, because the research had heaps of feedback on that. First of all, it's only in rare cases that I'd give discounts or free membership to everybody. It's really on a case-by-case basis. But change the buying decision. One of the number one thing that people are doing is shifting to direct debit arrangements, because I may not have the money to pay my $600 membership now, but I might be able to pay $50. The other thing is then having processes for evaluating if people need more support than just shifting into a payment plan style arrangement, direct debit style arrangement. But the big thing, there's also ways of potentially getting membership sponsored, or even just providing those concessions, because if you help people when they're down, they're going to come back to you when they're up again. Great to know how to help a traditional board to think differently on their membership. Do you know, traditional boards, you've got to take people on a journey. Now, if you're looking for something that's cheap, I highly recommend, I've got a heap of videos that I've done, and I know a lot of people show them to boards, talking about the change that's happened in the association sector, and how if you don't adapt, you're not going to emerge at the end of it. And all of the stuff that I do is research-led. And that's a really great way to get a board on board, because you can't just go and tell people the outcome. You've got to take them on a journey, and a board has to have an epiphany in themselves to understand why they need to change before they're going to make that change. So I'd recommend giving them a copy of my Association Apocalypse paper, maybe at the beginning of a board meeting, showing one of the half-an-hour webinars that I've done on the changing association environment. You may not take them into this webinar, because this kind of assumes people have been to my stuff beforehand. So selecting the right ones takes them on that journey, and they'll be much more amenable. And you don't need the whole board to change. You just need a couple to champion that change. So having a chat with a few of them before the board meeting, trying to identify who might be more receptive to that kind of material and to champion it at the board would really help. Member satisfaction survey. Oh, Julie, you've hit it. To the webinars, if you look on the screen there, you can find the webinars at answers.net.au in the video on demand library. And if you go to smsonline.net.au, it's also got them on there. There's many roads lead to Rome. Member satisfaction surveys, that's an interesting one, because I loathe them with a passion, the way that a lot of the traditional ones have done, because when I send out an email survey, it really is difficult to get insights, because members might say they think something's a good idea, but they may not actually be prepared to use that service if you bring it in. One of the things that I like to do is to mix in interviews with members, as well as you might do a survey on looking at what have you done in the past, or what did you think of this? There's a lot of bad ones out there. Things like NPS score is a useful, interesting indicator. Looking at retention rates and that kind of thing might tell you how to vary it. So for example, if you've got a professional body, you're going to have different groups in there. You're going to have students, you're going to have people who are sort of in the upswing of their career, senior managers, you might have doers, managers, and leaders. So whatever segmentation you need, I would vary the surveying that you do by that group to try and understand their nuances. Because one of the things that we found out is when we did some member satisfaction research, we did it by phone call, and we found out with this particular group, when we asked them what they valued, almost everybody invariably said networking. But the scary thing was, since I was speaking to them, I could actually pursue that further. And I asked people, when you say that word networking, what's the picture in your head? And terrifyingly, anybody who was over 40 kind of gave me, this eye roll you could hear, because it was on the phone. Networking, you go to the conferences and you talk to people, and you go to the Christmas party, networking, and you can almost hear their impatience with being asked such a silly question. But when I asked that question to the younger members, to these people in their early 20s, terrifying, they had said, oh, we value networking. But when I said, what's the picture in your head when you said that? They said, oh, well, being able to pick up my phone and connect to the person who can help me with the question I've got right now, so I can get an answer I can rely on. The definition of the word was different. And if we just relied on somebody saying they like networking, they would have probably continued with the Christmas parties and the conferences, not realizing that this younger cohort, when they answered that question, were thinking of something entirely different. So it's not as simple as just sending a member satisfaction survey. It's about getting a deep understanding of each member segment. And large numbers of members are passive. Yep, not active. How do you measure the increasement of engagement of passive and influence them? Once again, in that instance, I really break down each market segment and I try to figure out what is the value that they're trying to extract. So for example, if I'm somebody who's about to graduate and I'm joining a professional body. Now, broadly speaking, when anyone joins a professional association, it's an investment in the success of their career and they're expecting a return on that. And often that return is going to be advanced further, faster, earning higher salary, raising their profile, you know, the usual. But for a student, it's about bringing something more specific. When I'm talking to a student about joining a professional association, it's, well, this is an investment in making sure that you take that best critical first step into a successful career. We're going to help provide you with the tools and resources that you need to advance your career and get you started as quickly as possible, so that as fast as possible you're earning as you're at your potential, you've got the skills and resources that you need, that you're actually making the connections. And importantly, we're not just keeping you up to date, we're bringing you up to date to tell you all the stuff you didn't even know that you needed to know. So when I'm developing a value proposition for that market and activating them, I'm activating them on that basis, and the product, services, and activations are very bespoke to them. And it's nothing that I'd give to somebody who was senior and perhaps getting close to retirement. So when you're looking at the measurement and how do I measure increased engagement? Well, I would be looking at that new graduate segment and saying, well, how do I measure success? Is it via activity on our social media? Is it via participation in different online groups or resources that we've got that about starting your career? And then I'd look at it for that group, and I'd have some completely different engagement mechanisms from other market segments and measurables and reporting. And that is really important to do, because I've seen a lot of people waste hundreds of thousands of dollars on things like social media, but being on there without actually having a reason to be on there. And so they try and do everything. And social media is a huge money pit and time waster if you've not got a focus. And one of the things I really like about segmentation is you can look at your comms and say, well, why do we do this magazine? For this segment, why is the magazine relevant? What do we need to do to engage? Why do we do Twitter? Why do we do Facebook or LinkedIn? And you can actually start matching it up to say, well, okay, we understand our Facebook page is successful if it creates these things. Does that make sense? It's very funny talking to a camera. Are there any other questions? Because yes, that networking thing was a surprise and kind of a shock for me. There is so much going on. The change in association models right now is, I mean, it was accelerating before COVID, but right now it is unbelievable. And associations have really got to keep on top of that. And the strategic planning, making sure that anybody involved in the process understands that is critical, because the amount of competitors coming to the market. And the other thing to consider as well, and we didn't cover it in this session, but the research that we did showed very clearly that the majority of associations are expanding beyond their traditional scope of operations. The competitive market in the association sector is about to get intense, because it's not just competition from other associations expanding their scope. There's a number of for-profit competitors moving in to attack, not necessarily head on, but they're taking away some of the more profitable areas of associations, things like events and publications and different products and services. So as associations, we really need to be thinking about, how do we adapt in this environment? How do we reinvent ourselves so that we truly are the leaders of our sectors, that the hub, the focal point that brings people together and is seen as the place to go? And traditional models aren't going to work for that. And you've got to know what that is. Well, thank you, Julie. Strategic planning, yes, I've sat through a number of boring presentations. It's got to be fun. You have to get through a strategic planning day. If people aren't passionate during the day, then you're doing something wrong. Because associations, the reason I love this sector is associations exist to create a powerful, positive change for their community. It's an amazing calling, and to be part of a process where people get to say, this is the change we're going to make and this is how we're going to do it, that should be exciting. Your people who are in that session should be feeling energized and really engaged to be able to come up with solutions that enable them to achieve that. Because if they're finding it dry and boring, then what's going to come out of it at the end is going to be dry and boring. And that shouldn't be the case, because I can see the impact that associations make on people, and it's huge. And really, I quite get upset because, you know, charities are wonderful, and I do a lot of work with charities, and they're amazing. But the role of associations and ensuring a strong, viable society and sustainable communities is huge. The impact is massive, but it's really underappreciated. It's certainly not like selling a tube of toothpaste. You get to make a real difference, and strategic planning is the start of that. So I really wish you all the best of luck. I'll send you all of the resources I can, because with it, you know, I'm the only, I can only do so much, but anything that I can, tools, templates, if you've ever got any questions, there's so many resources out there, and I'm happy to connect you into them. Any other questions before we close off? Thanks, Catherine. Well, I'm heading off to lunch now, but I will send out everything on Monday. And yeah, when you get that come through, if you got any questions, hit reply. I'm very geeky, have no life, so I'm always on my emails. Alrighty. Well, you guys have a wonderful day. Yes, it's my first lunch since COVID with my co-workers. I haven't seen them face to face, and I'm very, very excited because we have a wonderful team. So wonderful. Well, have a great day and a great weekend, everybody. And yeah, we'll talk soon.